All right, we are live. Welcome, everybody. My name is Tim McMahon. I'm the marketing director here at St. Joseph Hospital. And tonight, I'm excited to welcome two very special guests to our live show here. We have Dr. Pamela Beahm. She's one of our pediatricians here in Nashua. And we have Dr. Loretta Chou, also one of our pediatricians. And the two of them will be answering some of the most common questions we receive from parents about the COVID vaccination for kids, specifically between the ages of 5 and 11. We know that the FDA just approved the vaccine, the Pfizer vaccine, for children in this age group. And we also know parents have a lot of questions, maybe some concerns, and we hope to be able to answer most of those this evening over the next 20 or 30 minutes. Throughout the broadcast, if you have a question, since this is a live broadcast, feel free to post them in the chat box below, and we will ask our experts here those questions kind of as they come. So to start things off, we have a list of questions that we get most often, especially since the FDA just approved the Pfizer vaccine. And we're going to go back and forth with both pediatricians. And again, if you want to jump in at any point, ask a question, please feel free. So to start things off, we're going to go with Dr. Chou. Our first question is, I've heard COVID is mild for most kids. Do they really need to be vaccinated? Go ahead, Doc.
So it is true that kids at this age tend to have more mild symptoms. What we really worry about, is particularly between ages 5 and 11, is whether or not they're going to have complications to that natural infection down the road. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. So we do also believe that the vaccinated kids tend to have a much better immune response that is stronger and more long-lasting than from a natural infection.
Great, thank you. All right, our next question, we will go over to Dr. Beahm. Dr. Beahm, how well does the COVID vaccine work for kids?
So in the recent clinical trials that that Pfizer did, they showed that this vaccine is the efficacy of this vaccine is almost 91%. So that means that the rate of COVID infection in kids that are vaccinated is 91% lower than the rate of COVID infection in kids that are unvaccinated in their study population. So for vaccines to be approved, they have to be at least 50% effective. And so this vaccine is way more effective than that. So we're really excited that this vaccine works. Not only does it work to prevent infection, it works for those people who do get infection. It's much less likely to cause severe infection and severe disease.
And just a follow-up to that, how does that compare to the vaccine for adults, or for even kids 12 plus?
So I think it's a pretty similar rate as far as the vaccine efficacy. I think in the beginning we were hearing numbers as high as 95 to 96%, but overall I think it's in the 90% range. So it works. It's just efficacious, and it's just as efficacious with a much lower dose for the vaccine, so it has less side effects.
Great. And just so we know, it's still a 2-dose regimen, correct?
Correct. It's a 2-dose regimen, 21 days apart.
Great, thank you. All right, Dr. Chou, can you talk a little bit about the side effects? We often hear, certainly as adults who have been vaccinated, kind of a range of side effects. Some people get no side effects. Some people have flu-like symptoms. Is it the same for kids? Is it different? What should parents expect?
I think the most common side effect that you're going to see across ages is the local inflammation. So you're going to have some pain in the arm. Usually that will last a few days. And there are other ones that potentially can happen. From what I understand, it seems like that the side effects for kids are much less frequent than it is for adults. And I think part of it is because they have a smaller dose that they're getting, but other possibilities are they could have a little headache, a little bit of fever, body aches that usually go away within 48, 72 hours.
Now, I know a question that came up again, especially earlier on in the kind of the first round of vaccinations for adults, when people were hearing about side effects, they are often, taking Advil, taking things kind of before getting the vaccine to help hopefully lessen the effects after the fact. Is that recommended for kids, or was it even recommended for adults?
You want to take that?
So I don't think that's been specifically studied in COVID. The only thing that I'm aware of that's ever been studied is taking Tylenol before getting a flu vaccine. And what they showed was it does blunt the immune response. So in general, I think it's not recommended to take Tylenol or ibuprofen before giving a vaccination because it can potentially blunt the immune response. We just recommend having those medicines available after the vaccination if you do get side effects that are uncomfortable, but not taking it prophylactically.
Okay, great, thank you. All right, back to Dr. Beahm. What do you think about, folks who say, I'm just going to wait a little bit, see how the other vaccinations go before I vaccinate my child? I think we saw this a lot in the early days of having a vaccine with the adults. There's a lot of wait and see approach. Is that what we recommend with kids, or what are your feelings on that?
So, we definitely don't recommend the wait and see approach because COVID is with us right now, and we want to do as much as we can to mitigate COVID, the spread of COVID as soon as possible, and that includes now getting the school age kids because we are seeing increasing numbers of COVID in school age children. I think one of the things that parents are concerned about is this is a new vaccine, and they want to make sure that the vaccine is safe. And what we know from other vaccinations is that it's really rare to see any side effects from a vaccine more than 8 weeks out from the vaccination. And so this vaccine has been studied in kids well over 8 weeks, and they found really no long-term side effects in kids past that 8 weeks, during that 8-week period of time. So I think, the safety data is really good. And I think it's important to get people vaccinated as soon as possible. So I would encourage people to think about going ahead and doing the vaccine now. Strongly encourage that.
Great. And we have our first question from an audience member. What do you recommend around getting the flu vaccine and the COVID vaccine for kids? Should they get it together? Should they space it out? Dr. Chou, what do you think?
I think it's safe to get them together. You might have a little bit more of a side effect, but there's no reason why you should wait for one to get the other. It's been shown that we can give any vaccine with the COVID now without having to have any period of time to wait between. So it is safe.
Great, thank you. We have another question from an audience member. And actually, I'll post on the screen so that everyone can see it. And so it's easier for you guys to read as well. So the question is, with the number of cases increasing over the past 7 days, would you say the benefit for getting the vaccine outweighs the risk of the mild side effects? There's also a question about, the myocarditis being, a rare side effect. And that's what parents are concerned about.
Mm-hmm.
So, absolutely. I think that the benefits of getting the vaccine far outweigh the risks of the mild side effects from the vaccination. Again, the vaccine is very, very efficacious, and the side effects are mild. And as far as the population, the 5 to 11-year-olds during this study, they did not find any kids with the myocarditis in that age group, and they didn't have anybody with any long-term side effects. So.
Oh, that's good to know. So that was mostly in the older population of children, correct?
The
myocarditis.
The adolescent and young adult males that had the highest rates of the myocarditis.
Right.
And even that was extremely rare. It was still a very rare side effect.
And I think it's important to know also that myocarditis, the risk is much higher from the natural infection than it is from the vaccine. So, you're more risk to get myocarditis if you actually don't get the vaccine and get the infection.
Great, thank you. Okay, questions are starting to pour in here. So, We will get back to our standard list, but I do want to answer questions as they come in to help our viewers out. One person just asked, how soon will kids be able to get vaccinated at St. Joseph Hospital Pediatrics?
So that's a good question. We have our first vaccine clinic coming up this Thursday, and we're hoping to kind of learn from that experience and do more clinics. We have been talking about doing them here in the office, but there's some logistics to that because of how it has to be stored and because of observation times. So right now we're looking at doing the clinics at the hospital. And we'll be planning more of those after we do our clinic on Thursday.
And I will just add that this Thursday's clinic is completely full. We had 104 slots available, and those are all completely full at this point. But to Dr. Beam's point, we are working on creating additional clinics in the future. So, it's going to be our first rollout of the COVID vaccine for kids. So, I think to your point, it's going to be a learning process for how many kids we can do in a day. Another question just came in. What is the dose of the Pfizer vaccine for children? Is it weight-based? Dr. Chou.
It's actually not. The dosage for adults is actually 30 micrograms. And so they have found from all the research that they've done from the study is that it's actually a third of that dose. So they have seen that between ages 5 and 11, that actually 10 micrograms gives a very robust immune response. And that's the dose that is for that age. So it's not weight-based.
Great. Thank you. And just one person commented, Rite Aid has the kids vaccine as well. And I think you'll find that most of the local pharmacies do carry it. But my impression so far is that, there's a lot of people asking for it. So there's kind of a wait at this point. Is that what you guys are finding in the office?
So I think this is just going to take a community effort to get all the kids vaccinated. So I know public health is doing vaccinations, we're doing vaccinations, the pharmacies are doing vaccinations, and our goal is just to get as many kids vaccinated in as soon as possible. So if going to the pharmacy, if you can get an appointment at the pharmacy to get your child vaccinated, it's the same vaccine. So, but we're all working together to get everybody vaccinated as best we can.
That's great. And again, I apologize. The questions are coming in. Every time you're about halfway through an answer, another one comes in. So we'll just keep going with it. And they're good questions. So we want to make sure we answer the audience questions. This next question comes from Melissa. My kids had COVID in late August. Should I hold off on getting them vaccinated since they have natural immunity? And I think the follow-up question to that is, how long does natural immunity last?
So let me take this one.
It's up to you.
So you can have natural immunity up to 6 months, but it's not that the natural immunity is not nearly as robust as the immunity that you get from the vaccination. So the recommendation is even if you have had even if you've had natural infection, you still should get a COVID vaccination because you will get much better immunity from that. And as far as when to get that, we just wait until your symptoms have resolved, until you're past your infectious and isolation period before getting the COVID vaccine. So,
and they've also go ahead.
Go ahead. Do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I was just going to say that also sometimes when they are looking at the data on natural infection, some people, they say it's about anywhere from 3 to 6 months, but everyone is different. And so I kind of explain to patients that it's almost like when you get the vaccine, your immunity is just much stronger of a defense than your natural immunity. So.
Great. Thank you. All right, so we'll get back to my list a little bit here. Try to make sure I haven't already asked some of these questions. Here's a good question. If my child is 11 years old, should we wait to get them the higher adult dosage at age 12? Should I wait until they're 12 so they can get a higher dosage? Dr. Chou, what do you think?
I would say no. I would say, get it as soon as you can. You're more likely to get the infection than to, wait to get the vaccine. The dosage is a little bit different, but we do again know that this age range between 5 and 11 has been studied to show that it's got a very good response for that dosage. So,
okay, so great.
I wouldn't recommend to wait.
Yep, 11.5-year-olds, time to get it.
I think there's a benefit to getting it when they're 11 because they have fewer side effects with that lower dose, but they do get that same vigorous immune response.
Okay, great. All right, another question from the audience. I'm hearing that some parents and guardians are concerned about allergies. What allergies would prevent a child from getting the vaccine?
So there is no allergy to any foods or medications except for the polyethylene glycol. And that is the same ingredient as in Miralax, if people use that, which is an over-the-counter medication. But in terms of any other possible allergies, there is no allergy that if a child has would prevent them from getting the vaccine, except for that one.
So this vaccine has no food proteins in it, so there's no egg in it. There's no latex in this vaccine. There's no preservatives in this vaccine. There's no heavy metals in this vaccine. So really low risk for allergic reaction. As Dr. Chou said, the polyethylene glycol is the one thing that some people have had allergic reactions to, but it's extremely rare. So unless you know you have an allergy to that, there's no contraindication from an allergy standpoint to getting the vaccine. If you do have an allergic reaction to the first dose of the vaccination, then that would be a contraindication for the second one.
There's also no antibiotics or any other medication in there as well. But this is why all the different sites who are actually giving the vaccine is recommending to at least wait 15 minutes. Because most of the time, if there is any sort of bad allergy reaction, like anaphylaxis, it would happen usually within that time period.
Great. Thank you. All right. Another question here. Some people have said they're anxious about vaccinating their kids with a vaccine that's produced in such a short period of time. Is it really safe?
It is safe. I think one of the misconceptions is that it's a very new technology and it's been around for more than 10 years. The other thing, too, is that the reason why it was done in such a short period of time is because the government was able to fund it to the extent that they would actually bypass a lot of the red tape that usual trials take a lot longer. So the reason they did that was because we were trying to find a way to stop the pandemic. So that is the reason why it seems shorter. But they still go through every single step that any other trial goes through.
Great.
They were able to do some of the steps simultaneously, so they didn't skip any of the steps that were required. They went through all the same rigorous testing, but they were able to do some of the steps simultaneously. And then, as Dr. Chou said, a lot of the, kind of those wait times and waiting for approvals, that was shortened quite a bit.
Mm-hmm.
Great, thank you. All right, another question from the audience. I've heard rumors of it potentially affecting reproductive systems. Is there any truth to this?
There's absolutely no evidence that this vaccine or any other vaccine affects fertility.
Okay.
I think the other way I explain it to parents is that this is a messenger RNA, which all of us have. That's how a cell communicates to another cell. And this messenger RNA does not interact with the DNA of your body in any cell. And it also gets destroyed in a few days. So the messenger RNA that's bringing in the information doesn't stay in the body for very long at all.
Yeah, you hear a lot of confusion about people kind of mixing DNA with mRNA. And I think that's where some of the fear comes from, that it's going to affect their DNA, but that's 100% untrue, correct?
True. Yeah.
Right. Thank you. All right. Next question. Do you know the current rates of cases, hospitalizations, or even death in children between the ages of 5 and 11 who contract COVID?
So let's see. So we do have some of that information. The most recent information, the way it's reported is a weekly case rate. So it's how many cases per 100,000 kids. And the current weekly case rate is about 225 cases of COVID per 100,000 children. So,
And do we know the hospitalization rate?
Hospitalization rate is still pretty low. I think it's not quite one child per 100,000 kids for hospitalization.
Yep.
So some of the data actually that has come out recently is from over the whole entire time of the pandemic, right? So there are 1.9 million cases of kids at this age from 5 to 11 who've had COVID, and about 8,300 have been hospitalized, but only a third of those have been hospitalized in the ICU, meaning that it's become much more severe. The total number of kids who actually have died from COVID, the natural infection, is at 94 at this point. The most common cause is something called MIS-C, which is multiple inflammatory syndrome of children. And the interesting thing about all the data is that this is the age group from 5 to 11 that has the largest percentage who actually do get MIS-C. So it's about 44% of all the kids who get this multiple inflammatory syndrome, 44% of them are between the ages of 5 and 11.
So, and just one thing,
go ahead.
That there's been about close to 700 deaths of pediatric patients, but 94 of those have been in this 5 to 11 year. So,
Great, thank you. And it does kind of brings up the question that I hear all the time is, if such a small percentage of kids who get COVID get really sick, become hospitalized, or even die, then why are we giving them vaccines? If the chances of them getting really sick is so low, do they really need to be vaccinated?
So I would argue that one child dying from COVID is too many kids dying. And so we've got almost 700 children dying of COVID. And if you compare that to flu, that's much higher than what we see in a typical flu season. So that's one reason, because even though most kids do get mild disease, some kids do get severe disease, and some kids do unfortunately die from this disease. And not only that, they also can pass it on to other family members or close contacts who may not be able to be vaccinated or who may be more vulnerable. And then in addition to it, there's all the kind of non-medical issues, how it's affecting their mental health, how it's affecting their schoolwork and interacting with other kids in social ways and doing their sports.
Yeah.
Yep.
So
and
go
ahead. I'm sorry.
It's not mild, even
Yeah.
if disease for an individual person is mild. The pandemic.
Yeah, I agree. And I would add on to what Dr. Beahm said is that we mentioned the multiple inflammatory syndrome. For the data for all children under 18, it's about 1 in 3,200 kids who get it. 60 to 70% of them are admitted into the ICU, and 1 to 2% of them die from that. But for this age group between 5 and 11, it's actually 20% die from it. So for some reason, this age group is the one we worry about more about complications from a natural infection. And also long-term COVID is something that we do see. We don't see it as often as we do in young adults or older adults, but it can happen. And, that includes things like fatigue, shortness of breath, coughing, headaches, even decrease in concentration, insomnia. Those are all things that can happen from just having a natural infection. And these can last for more than 3 months or so.
Great. Thank you for those answers. And during that time, we had a few more questions come in. So one of the questions was, will we need a vaccine every year, just like the flu shot?
That's a great question, and we wish we knew the answer to that. At this point, at this point, we don't have enough data to make that recommendation. I think it depends. The more people that get vaccinated, the less of a problem COVID will become. So in an ideal world, we wouldn't see COVID anymore. COVID would burn out if we get high enough vaccination rates. If that's not the case, if COVID doesn't burn out, then I think we just have to follow the science and see if immunity wanes. Then yes, we may need to get vaccination, boosters.
Great.
So that's a possibility, but we don't know the answer yet.
Thank you.
And in the history of vaccines, like for instance, like hepatitis B, tetanus, those were all studied and over time realized that they actually need another booster. How many is the big question mark.
Got it. And actually, in this next question that just came in, we were talking about this before the broadcast, was, can I get my son the vaccine now as he's fighting COVID at this very moment?
So yeah, we were talking about this, and we don't recommend that you get the vaccine when you have COVID. We recommend you wait until they're past their isolation period and feeling better, and then get the vaccination.
But there's no harm if, say, your child has it, but you didn't know about it. There's no harm to get the COVID vaccine while you have the infection.
Right. So it's not going to make your child sicker.
Right.
Maybe your child was, symptom free, so you had no idea, and then you kind of found out maybe after the fact. But great, that's good to know. And we have another comment from Bobby Bagley, who works at National Public Health, and just saying, we also don't know the long-term effects of COVID on the body. It's such a fairly new disease. We have chronic diseases that we are worried about. So thank you, Bobby, for adding that. All right. I have a few more questions to ask as we kind of wrap up here in the next probably 5 to 10 minutes. Are there any factors that increase the susceptibility and the risk of hospitalization and death for children in this age range? So are there any things that are going to make kids more susceptible to being hospitalized or even dying?
Probably the two most common that have shown is anybody who has an underlying lung disease like asthma. And that's not if they just have very, very mild asthma, maybe once every year or two. It's if they have pretty severe asthma. But also, in addition, obesity has been found to be a risk factor. So.
Great. So go ahead.
Depression puts people at increased risk for contracting COVID.
Mm-hmm.
So anybody who has kids with severe asthma, immunocompromised, obesity, those are the ones that should really be signing up to get this vaccine sooner rather than later. Okay, great. Thank you. We already talked about MIS-C. That was actually my next question. So thank you, Dr. Chou, for covering that. Another question that came up was, are there any groups in this age range that are at a higher risk of adverse events from the vaccine? And the question was, why did Sweden and Denmark pause the rollout in children? And we talked a little bit about some of those risk groups, but anything else we could add to that?
So do you want to answer that, Dr. B?
No, I was going to say, I think we had talked about that. So why don't you go ahead and take that one?
Yeah. So what had happened in Sweden and Denmark was that they were actually giving the Moderna, which is a higher dosage than it is for the Pfizer. So for instance, the adult population, it's about 100 micrograms that the Moderna is giving versus only 30 mics of the Pfizer. So both are giving for this age group, 5 to 11, about a third of that. So they were finding in Sweden and Denmark that they were actually getting a higher percentage of kids having myocarditis, which is why they put it on pause. Right now, what they're doing is they're planning on giving all these children between this age group the Pfizer one instead.
Great, thank you. And the last question that I have on my list here are, we know other vaccines are already required for kids to go to school. how is this vaccine similar or different from the other vaccines kids are already required to get?
So, well, I mean, one is this vaccine is still under the emergency use authorization. So, as far as it's not required for schools, but we're strongly encouraging it for all kids. It is a messenger RNA vaccine, so which is a little different from the other vaccinations. So basically, other vaccinations, the vaccine contains the protein, and then the body develops the immune response to that protein. Whereas this vaccine gives the body the messenger RNA, gives them the code to make the proteins inside the body and develop that immune response. But working in the same way to develop immunity, develop antibodies, so that when the body comes into contact with the vaccine naturally, that it's already equipped to fight off the infection.
Great, thank you. So with that being said, I don't have any more comments coming in on Facebook or on YouTube. Do you have any other final thoughts that you can share with parents? Dr. Chou.
I think it's really important that any parents who have questions or concerns to talk to your pediatrician. They're the person that you bring your children to. You trust them. They're going to tell you the truth. They'll tell you what are the facts and what are not facts. So I would just encourage any parent. I understand both we both have children, and I think it's really important to make sure that you get the truth from your own provider.
So, and we wouldn't be recommending this vaccine if we didn't think that it was safe and effective. But we are open for anybody who has questions and who wants to talk about it and have these discussions, because we want people to be comfortable, but we also want kids to be safe.
Right.
Great. Well, thank you both so much for joining us tonight. I think this was a great discussion. Great comments, great questions from the audience. It's always great when people are kind of filtering in questions. And, again, if anybody out there has additional questions, feel free to add them in the chat below. You can always respond to them later, as this broadcast is automatically recorded and shared on our Facebook and YouTube pages. But again, thank you, Dr. Beahm. Thank you, Dr. Chou. You guys are fantastic panelists for tonight's broadcast. And thank you everybody for watching. So have a wonderful night, all.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all. Good night.